His verdict was delivered softly, yet with the finality of a gavel at an auction where her honor was the prize. The shirt will have to come off. The fire roared in the hearth, turning the room into a gilded cage where an aging genius prepared to capture his most fragile treasure, his 16-year-old wife. Her cheeks burned, but to him, this blush of shame was not a signal to stop. It was merely another color on his palette, the most vibrant and coveted of all. He spoke of high art, of glorifying beauty, but behind his words lay the unyielding gaze of a surgeon dissecting her youth, and of a proprietor branding his property with brush and canvas. This scene is not merely an episode from the life of a great artist. It is the key to a secret that historians prefer to skirt around. What truly lay hidden behind the grand portraits, behind the facade of a respectable marriage between a master in his twilight years and a girl who was little more than a child? Was it a story of great love and creative partnership, as the guidebooks tell us? Or was it a cold, calculated transaction, as her contemporaries whispered? This is not the story of a genius and his muse. It is a story of power, vulnerability, and the price a woman pays when her body becomes another's masterpiece. We will step behind the curtain of this brilliant union to uncover the truth buried beneath layers of varnish and lies. So, who was this girl whose embarrassment was to be immortalized for eternity? Her name was Helena Fourment, and she had just turned 16. She was the daughter of Daniel Fourment, a respected merchant of silks, tapestries, and other luxuries, a wealthy man of Antwerp's solid burgher class. Her world was cozy and predictable, a world of silk tapestries, Sunday mass, and strict parental supervision. She was the youngest of 11 children, a flower in a well-tended garden, destined to be plucked not by a young romantic gardener, but by the master of the entire estate. For her future husband, Peter Paul Rubens, was not just a man. He was a phenomenon, a titan of the Baroque era whose fame thundered across all of Europe. At 53, he had long outgrown the status of a mere painter, becoming one of the most influential figures of his time. To grasp the scale of his personality, imagine a man who could discuss the composition of an altarpiece and the terms of a peace treaty between Spain and England with equal ease. That was Rubens. His Antwerp studio was a veritable art factory, producing masterpieces with the speed of an assembly line, and he was its CEO, chief strategist, and brand. Kings and cardinals did not simply commission paintings from him, they sought his counsel. He was a confidant to the French Queen Mother, Marie de Medici, and undertook delicate diplomatic missions for the Spanish crown, negotiating in the courts of Madrid and London. For his services, King Philip IV of Spain granted him a title of nobility, an almost unheard of honor for an artist, no matter how great. He was fabulously wealthy. He owned a luxurious palace of a home, collected antique cameos, and lived on a grand scale that rivaled the most magnificent aristocrats. Yet, behind this facade of omnipotence and success lay a deep personal tragedy. A few years earlier, Rubens had suffered a terrible loss. His first wife, Isabella Brandt, had died of the plague. Theirs had been a marriage of equals, filled with tenderness and mutual respect, and her death left a wound in his soul that would not heal. He mourned her for years, finding solace only in his work, but time was taking its toll. Widowhood weighed on him. The vast house felt empty, and his station demanded a mistress and heirs. Noble families vied to offer him their daughters in marriage. To be connected to Rubens himself was an incredible mark of prestige. But the artist, well acquainted with the treachery of courtly intrigue, was wary of aristocrats. He feared their arrogance, their disdain for the craft that, despite all his titles, remained the source of his fame and fortune. He needed not a society lioness, but a woman who would not blush to see him with a brush in his hand. And he found her in a family with whom he had long-standing ties of friendship and even kinship through his late Isabella. His choice fell upon young Helena, a girl he had known nearly since birth, whom he had sketched more than once alongside her sisters. This decision was a mixture of pragmatic calculation and a desire for security. He was not choosing a mysterious stranger, but a familiar and malleable material from which he, the great master, could sculpt his ideal. According to rumor, for all his worldly sophistication, Rubens was terrified of women, of their unpredictability and power. By taking a 16-year-old child from a family he knew, he wasn't just gaining a spouse. He was ensuring himself against any surprises, guaranteeing complete and absolute control over his future. It was a bargain in which one party received peace and obedience, while the other received a ticket to a world of unimaginable luxury and high status. So, what did the great Rubens see in this round-faced, fair-haired girl with her full arms and ample bosom? He saw not just a pretty face, but the living embodiment of his artistic ideal. In an age when Spanish fashion dictated ascetic pallor and severe, almost bodiless silhouettes, Rubens swam against the current. He celebrated life in its most succulent, abundant form. His ideal was a woman like a ripe fruit, sun-drenched and bursting with health, her warm skin flushed with a natural blush. Helena was the quintessence of this ideal, tender yet robust, as delectable as a Flemish still life. She possessed not a trace of aristocratic coldness. She was earthly, accessible, and endlessly alluring in her natural state. He looked upon her not as a man looks at a woman, but as a sculptor gazes upon an untouched block of living marble from which perfection can be carved. Fortunately for us, the artist did not keep his motives a secret. In a candid letter to his friend, the scholar Nicolas Claude Fabry de Peresque, Rubens explained his choice with astonishing frankness. These lines are a priceless psychological document. "I have taken a young wife, the daughter of honest burghers," he wrote, "though everyone tried to persuade me to choose from the court. But I feared that affliction of the nobility, and especially their arrogance. I wanted a wife who would not blush to see me take up my brushes." In these words lie the essence of his fears and desires. He, who had reached the pinnacle of fame and fortune, still remembered that by birth he was no equal to his noble patrons. An aristocratic wife might look down upon his labor, be ashamed of the smell of paint and oil, and consider his genius nothing more than a well-paid trade. His pride could not have borne such a humiliation. The phrase about a wife who would not blush also holds a second, deeper meaning. He needed more than a spouse who would tolerate his profession. He needed a model, a muse, ready to become a part of his art without reservation. He sought a woman whose flesh would lie obediently on his canvases, unburdened by noble prejudices about honor and modesty. A girl from a burgher family, raised to revere her elders and respect hard work, was perfectly suited for this role. She would not challenge the will of her famous husband. She would not dispute his right to turn her body into an object of contemplation. Rubens was seeking submission wrapped in a package of freshness and beauty. Like a wise strategist, he was eliminating any potential obstacles to his creative path, and his marriage was his most crucial strategic decision. And what of Helena herself? Could a 16-year-old girl raised in a patriarchal family have had an opinion on the matter? Perhaps, in the quiet of her bedroom, she dreamed of something else, of a boy her own age, of timid glances across the church square, of a marriage for love, not calculation. But in reality, her desires were of no consequence. Her parents' will was law, and an offer from Peter Paul Rubens himself was a gift from heaven, not to be refused. With the pragmatism inherent to her class, she and her family assessed all the advantages of the alliance. For them, it was not merely a marriage, but a monumental investment, elevating the entire family to a new social stratum. Helena humbly accepted her fate, trading her girlish dreams for tangible benefits, status, wealth, and a life beside a man the entire world called a genius. She walked into this gilded cage with her eyes wide open, not yet knowing that the price for such luxury would be exacted in the most intimate currency of all, her own body. Her fiancé's generosity surpassed the wildest expectations. The wedding gifts Rubens presented to his young bride could have made up a royal princess's dowry. This was not just a token of love. It was a demonstration of status, a declaration to all of Antwerp that he could afford anything. The inventory of gifts included 5 massive gold chains, 2 of them encrusted with diamonds, another adorned with fashionable black and white enamel, 3 strings of exquisite pearls, each pearl the size of a hazelnut, a lavish diamond necklace, sparkling earrings, and a gold anchor studded with diamonds, an elegant ornament for a bodice or a hat, and to top it all off, a single large diamond whose value was comparable to that of an entire estate. This flood of jewels was accompanied by countless gold and enamel buttons, a purse stuffed with gold coins, and entire chests filled with bolts of the most expensive fabrics: Venetian velvet, lion silk, Genoese brocade, and the finest satin. Finally, the jewel in the crown, her own carriage, an elegant vehicle drawn by a pair of purebred horses. Only a duke could afford such gifts, but then Rubens had long been living like one. Immediately after the wedding, the artist set about doing what he did best: creating. One of the first masterpieces born of this marriage was a magnificent formal portrait of Helena in her wedding attire. In it, she appears not as a frightened girl, but as the confident and blooming mistress of the house. Rubens painted her with unconcealed adoration, delighting in every detail: the sheen of the silk, the delicacy of the lace, the glint of the jewels, and, of course, the freshness of her young face. This portrait became the official introduction of the new Mrs. Rubens to the world. In the years that followed, he would paint her constantly as the ancient goddess Venus, as one of the 3 graces in the biblical scene of Bathsheba at the fountain. He depicted her with their children, creating idyllic scenes of domestic bliss where she was the caring mother and loving spouse. These canvases were the public face of their marriage, its showcase, displaying harmony and prosperity. But there was another side to their creative union, hidden from public view, the very side that made Helena blush and squirm. He asked her to pose for scenes not intended for a wider audience. These were not just nudes, but deeply personal, almost intimate studies of her body. Like an obsessed anatomist, Rubens studied every fold of her skin, the play of light on her shoulders, the curves of her figure. She complied, shedding her clothes for the sake of art and in the name of duty to her brilliant husband. But each time it was an ordeal. Then one day he conceived of something truly special. He asked her to pose wearing nothing but a luxurious sable fur coat lined with silk, one of the expensive gifts he had given her. The painting was destined to be incredibly sensual and provocative. The precious fur barely concealing her nudity, her gaze directed straight at the viewer. It all created the feeling of a private moment, secretly observed. Helena likely resisted for a long time. This portrait was too revealing, too personal. It blurred the line between art and private life. But Rubens was insistent. He envisioned a future masterpiece and would not back down. To soothe his wife, he gave her a solemn vow. This painting, which would later be known as Het Pelsken, the fur coat, would never leave the walls of their home. It would not be sold, would not enter any collection, and would remain their shared secret, their private treasure. This promise, made by a loving husband, was the deciding argument. Helena agreed. She did not yet know that this very portrait would become her most famous image, a symbol of their relationship and the object of her greatest fear. The painting turned out exactly as the master had intended, a masterpiece balanced on the edge of propriety and provocation, a hymn to the beauty of his young wife. But for Helena, it remained a permanent reminder of her vulnerability and of an oath she would have to defend even after her great husband was gone. 10 years flew by in a flash, filled with the laughter of children and the scent of fresh paint. In that time, Helena bore Rubens 4 children, becoming not only his model, but the mother of his late progeny. She managed their enormous household, received noble guests, and stood as the living symbol of her genius husband's prosperity. But in 1640, the great Fleming passed away. An entire era departed with him, leaving behind immortal masterpieces and a young widow who was then only 26 years old. Their 5th child, a daughter, was born 8 months after her father's death. Overnight, Helena was transformed from a muse and keeper of the hearth into the sole executor of his colossal legacy. And the first thing she did was declare war on her own image. Her greatest fear, her obsession, became those very canvases for which she had posed unclothed. While Rubens was alive, his authority had been her shield. Now that he was gone, she felt defenseless before the thousands of scrutinizing eyes that would study her body in the collections of aristocrats and kings. To her, this was not art, but a public exposure of her soul and flesh, the indelible mark of her submission. Driven by a belated sense of shame and a desire to protect her honor and her children's memory, she began methodically buying back the paintings for which she had posed. She spent enormous sums to reclaim control over her own body, scattered across canvases throughout Europe. It was rumored that she intended to commit them to the flames, to destroy forever the evidence of her youthful vulnerability. This desperate act might have deprived the world of priceless masterpieces had it not been for the intervention of her confessor, Cardinal Infante Ferdinand of Austria. An enlightened man and a connoisseur of art, he found the right words. He explained to Helena that these paintings were not a cause for shame, but the greatest possible hymn to the beauty created by the Lord, persuading her that to destroy such magnificent works would be to defy God's will and commit a crime against future generations. He saved the canvases from the fire. And the fur coat? Rubens had kept his promise. The painting remained in the family's private collection, a silent witness to their complex and intimate history. Helena bowed to the cardinal's will, preserving her husband's legacy for eternity. 4 years later, having settled all her affairs, she remarried. Her chosen husband was a respected diplomat, Jan Baptist van Broechoven, who gave her another child and a quiet, respectable life. She lived to be 59, a long and prosperous life by the standards of the time, surrounded by a large family, having left behind forever the world where her blushes and her nudity were a commodity, an inspiration, and a work of art. The woman whose body was destined to become an eternal symbol of Baroque painting had finally claimed what she perhaps always desired, the right to a quiet, earthly, and simply human fate.